Hi everybody, this is lecture 19, the Cold War and the Realignment of the World. I apologize for finishing this late. Let me get started. So today, I divided it into 4 parts. The Cold War, 1945 to the 1960s, the Cold War and the Atomic Age, then Japan, Korea and the Cold War, and European recovery after World War II. Remember, these lectures are intended to facilitate the book. So you've probably already read the book by now, but I'm hoping that by looking at these lectures, it'll help you understand maybe some things, review some things that you've read about. All right. Now, first item is these are extra credit opportunities. So I'll take extra credit up until Thursday at 11:59 p.m. Okay. So most of these are pretty easy, like Animal Farm. I want you to watch this YouTube about Animal Farm, the cartoon, and I want you to, for this extra credit assignment, read the article, watch the movie, then in 12 to 30 lines, relate the article or the movie to the class, okay? Turn it in as a PDF or a Word document, okay? What you do. For the next one, again, it's Animal Farm, but it's a second option. Relate the totalitarianism in Animal Farm to the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. How does the cartoon depict the rise of a totalitarian leader like Hitler? And how was the rise of Hitler different than what is depicted in Animal Farm? Remember, in Animal Farm, it's focused on the rise of Stalin in the Soviet Union. Okay, George Orwell. It's based on a book. George Orwell wrote Animal Farm, and it was a critique of the rise of Stalin. Okay, and the rise of the Communist Party in the Soviet Union. Okay, so you can do option number 1 or option number 2. And again, the most extra credits you can get is 30. So you cannot go beyond 30 points. All right. So for the next one, this one is about a nuclear program, and this one's an article that I liked. It's a daring raid against Nazi Germany's nuclear program. Okay, so it's an article. If you want to read it, out of 10 points. And again, in 12 to 30 lines, relate the article or the movie to the class. When I say 12 to 30 lines, I mean regular margins. Okay, 1-inch margins, 12 font. 12 font if it's Times New Roman, 11 font if it's another type of font. Okay, so just be honest. I'm not asking for a lot. I am asking you to critically engage with either the articles or the YouTube clips, okay, and relate them to what we have been learning in class. Now, the next one is another article. This one talks about the labels Third World and Global South, and it critically analyzes them. Okay, so I'll be talking about those today. Pay attention to that. And the last one, I made it 15 points because it's a 2-hour movie. It's a very good movie about decolonization in Algeria. Okay, so these movements, these decolonization movements, which I'll talk about in lecture 20, again, this is a good example of that. It's an award-winning movie, black and white movie. Okay, so those are options for extra credit. If you think you want to do it, make sure you turn it in by Thursday, 11:59 p.m. Okay. All right. So a little bit of review. Remember classical liberalism? These individual rights. Okay. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Again, not rights of the community, not rights of the family, individual rights. Also, remember free trade. Free trade is a strong component of classical liberalism. And that's the main difference between the liberalism of today and what's called classical liberalism, okay? The closest thing to classical liberalism today would be neoliberalism, which also emphasizes free trade, okay? Also, think about communism. Number 1, 2 definitions. Remember I told you about it? That's a different slide. Hold on. Okay. So think about communism in the PowerPoint when I talked about it in the previous lecture. Okay. Now, look at Adam Smith. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. Again, a liberal thinker, promoter of free trade. How does that apply to the US? Okay? Now look at Vladimir Lenin. We love our language and our country, and we are doing our very utmost to raise our toiling masses, 9/10 of our population, to the level of a democratic and socialist consciousness. Okay? So think about how does that relate to the Soviet Union, communism number one. Remember, I had two definitions for communism. The first one relates to this path to a utopia where the proletarians will own the means of production. Remember, the means of production stands for everything needed to produce goods, okay, and services. So this could be land, this could be machines, okay, everything except the workers. All right. So think about that. And the reason I bring these up is that at the end of World War II, we're going to have two superpowers. Before, we have seen how we've had competing nation states, but now we're going to have a diametrically opposed world with two competing superpowers. The United States on the one hand, the Soviet Union on the other. All right. And you're also going to have other peoples. So the people will be divided into a first world, the US and its supporters, a second world, the Soviet Union and its communist supporters, and a third world, basically everybody else. All right. And in this third world, nationalism will play a very strong role. Now, Israel will come into the U.S. sphere of influence, but not right away, okay? And remember, Zionism was a Jewish movement that promoted homeland. It's a nationalist movement. Think about why is it a nationalist movement, all right? And also think about the Holocaust and how it was influenced by nationalism, okay? So a very powerful force, nationalism. All right, so let's talk about the Cold War, 1945, from 1945 to the 1960s, okay? Here we see the ending of World War II from the Soviet side. Here's Mikhail Yegorov, and he's waving the Russian flag. Remember the sickle and the hammer. Remember the symbolism. Flags are important. They have important symbolism. It inspires the people, okay? Think about the stars and stripes and the U.S. and the different symbols. What do the stars stand for? What do the 13 stripes stand for? Okay? What do the colors stand for? All right? Now, this flag, as I told you, hammer, the cities. Sickle, used to cut down wheat, the countryside. Okay? So, red is usually a color for communism. It's for socialism. All right, so think about that. Now, the beginning of the Cold War, this is George Orwell, who figures prominently in your extra credit through his work. He also wrote 1984. You should definitely read 1984, and I also recommend watching Animal Farm. Okay. So George Orwell, he's the person credited with this term, Cold War. Okay, he wrote an essay. He's a very good writer, You and the Atomic Bomb, and it's published in 1945. But what is a Cold War? A Cold War is this period of rivalry between the U.S. and the Soviet Union that did not develop into a direct war with conventional forces, because each side produced enough nuclear weapons to destroy each other. And the world is going to be divided into three groups as a result of this Cold War. The first world, the US and its supporters. Second world, the Soviet Union and its supporters. Okay? And these two groups will form organizations of supporters. NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is formed first between the US and countries in Western Europe. Okay? And then the Soviet Union will respond with the Warsaw Pact. a series of Eastern European nations and the Soviet Union forming this alliance to respond. Okay. The third world, everybody else. You have Latin American countries, and you have many newly created nation states, which we will talk about. That are many newly created nation states that result from decolonization. Okay, and many of these third world nation states will be used by the U.S. or the Soviet Union as proxies. The term proxy is a short-term ally who could help the U.S. and Soviet Union weaken each other. Okay, they cannot fight directly, so they have to fight through proxies, through the armed forces of usually of third world nations. Okay. An example of a proxy force is the Viet Cong. Two examples, Viet Cong and Mujahideen. Okay, so the Soviet Union is going to provide, well, pilots, funding, and military experts to the Viet Cong. Actually, let me write NVA, North Vietnamese Army, because these are two different organizations, the North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong. So that's a little more accurate to say. So the Soviet Union is going to provide pilots, funding, and military expert to the NVA and the Viet Cong, communist guerrilla forces that attack. Communist guerrilla forces that will attack South Vietnam and its ally, the U.S. And then on the other hand, the U.S. will provide weapons and some funding to the Mujahideen, an Islamic group that's going to fight against Soviet Communist government of Afghanistan between 79 and 89. Another person that provided funding to the Mujahideen, Osama bin Laden. Okay. So again, the Soviet Union there will be a communist government in Afghanistan, and the Soviet Union will prop up this government, and the U.S. will support these forces, the Mujahideen, because they are fighting this Soviet-supported government in Afghanistan. All right, so keep that in mind. Again, they're going to fight many times through proxy forces. Here are Mujahideen fighters. And again, here is the Soviet premier, the leader of the Communist parties, Leonid Brezhnev. And this cartoon, again, the Mujahideen rebels fighting against him with U.S. support. Okay, so keep that in mind. These proxy forces, your book goes more into detail, but I want to give you an outline. And if you've read your book already, I want this to help you understand the way the U.S. and the Soviet Union try to destabilize the other. Okay, now let's talk about the atomic age. Again, in the Cold War, they're never going to fight a conventional war because of the threat of nuclear weapons. The world is going to pick sides. First world, second world. First world supports the U.S. Second world supports the Soviet Union. And the third world are neutral. And in time, those third world countries that do not develop at the same rate, that do not develop to the level of countries like the U.S. and Western Europe, will be considered the global South. So this third world term will be termed the global South. Your book does mention that the term third world was related to the third estate. But again, it is definitely a Eurocentric term, and so the term today, the term third world, has a negative, very negative connotation. That's why they're using the term global South for those countries that are not as economically developed as Western Europe and the U.S. Okay, and also countries, Asian countries like Japan, like Singapore, Korea. Now, there are certain fears after World War II that are going to develop among people of the U.S. and people of the Soviet Union. And there are reasons for these fears, okay, about the other. So the U.S., the people in the U.S. fear communist takeover from within and from without. What that means is that after the U.S. developed and employed the atomic bomb, dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Soviet Union is going to obtain the secrets of how to build their own atomic bomb very quickly. All right, and later the U.S. will develop an even more powerful hydrogen bomb, but the Soviet Union, through espionage, will be able to develop a hydrogen bomb very quickly. Okay, so here's a timeline. The first atomic test is July 16 in 45. August 6:45 is when the atomic bomb is dropped on Hiroshima. August 29th on and then August 29th, 1949, 4 years later, the Soviet Union, they have their first bomb test. Okay, 4 years is very quickly, and the Soviet Union is able to develop their own atomic bomb because they take advantage of espionage, the Rosenbergs. Okay, so the U.S. November 1, 1952, they test their first hydrogen bomb. Again, much more powerful atomic bomb than the first, the hydrogen bomb. And less than a year later, the Soviet Union tests. Okay, so the U.S. had good reason to fear a takeover from within. Okay, Soviets are able to employ Americans to spy on the atomic program, and they get the secrets very quickly. All right. Now the U.S. responses is they task the FBI to work within the U.S. And they're definitely going to abuse their power to look for subversives among American citizens within the U.S. mainland. Okay, so the U.S. takes care of investigations within the U.S. The Central Intelligence Agency will take care of investigations outside of the U.S., looking for spies, counter-espionage operations, and the CIA will have its own spies trying to learn Soviet secrets, okay, and the secrets of other countries which might be a threat, like China. And again, remember, the policy of the U.S. will be containment. Try to prevent communism from spreading into other countries. And this is going to have very terrible effects in Latin America. This is not a class about Latin America, but again, those were some of the negative effects. All right, so Soviet fears. They fear another invasion because they lost many more people than the U.S., okay, during the invasion of Germany and as they fought during World War II. The losses don't compare at all. Here's some data. Soviet Union lost between 8.8 and 10.7 million military people, both men and women. And they lost anywhere from 13.3 to 15.2 million civilian casualties. If we compare that to the U.S., the U.S. lost 416,000 service members, and they lost 2,500 civilians. So again, it doesn't compare. So the Soviet Union has a very strong fear of being invaded. All right. They also fear being isolated by what they call capitalists and imperialists. Okay. So when the U.S. forms a North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the Soviet Union sees it as a direct threat. Okay, and the response is to form the Warsaw Pact. Okay, some of their strategies are de-Stalinization and the Brezhnev Doctrine. Okay, which we'll talk about in this upcoming week. All right, so de-Stalinization. You've read in your book about the rise of Nikita Khrushchev as premier. Remember, they only have one political party, the Communist Party. Okay, so Nikita Khrushchev is a Soviet premier, and he's going to announce de-Stalinization. He's going to allow people to criticize Stalin, and he's going to turn against. It's still a communist country, But he's going to denounce these Stalin's repressive methods, and he's going to go back to Lenin, to a somewhat kinder kind of communism. Okay? Remember, Stalin was cracking down, and so people have gotten tired, and Khrushchev rises to power, and so he institutes his policy of de-Stalinization. All right? So going back to Lenin, there are different roads to socialism. And what he means by that, there are different roads to communism number one. This utopian society where peasants own the means of production. Okay, peasants, sorry. The proletarians own the means of production. Okay? Everything they do is promoted as being as steps on the road to socialism number one. Okay, he is a Marxist, so this idea of this utopian society is definitely there. Okay, and he's also going to support third world countries to promote the growth of communism. Some examples: Hungary, Cuba. Okay. However, when Khrushchev does this, people are going to test him out and see how much more independence they can gain from the Soviet Union. Okay, one of the people that does this is Imre Nagy and his supporters. Okay, Imre Nagy is going to replace Rakosi, this leader Rakosi, who had been a Stalinist, a strong Stalinist ally. Okay, Nagy is communist, but he's anti-Soviet Union, and he announces that he's going to take Hungary out of the Warsaw Pact. What is Khrushchev going to do? He's going to send in troops. Again, this step back from Stalinism, again, doesn't mean that the Soviet Union will completely abandon its policies, its harsh policies, to enforce this, again, the Warsaw Pact. Okay? So definitely Stalinist was harsh. Khrushchev is more of a moderate, but he's not a Democrat. He doesn't support democracy. It's a communist party. Okay? It's a communist country. And Khrushchev is only one person who has to answer to the Communist Party around him. He is the premier, but there are other powerful figures in the Communist Party, and they're not going to allow Hungary to leave the Warsaw Pact. Okay, so Khrushchev is going to send in troops, and thousands will be killed. The troops will kill thousands of Hungarians, as mentioned in your book. Now, you have, in 1962, you have the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay, this was during the time of Khrushchev's leadership. Okay, but let's go back in time a little bit. In 1959, forces led by Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, they're going to capture Havana, the capital of Cuba. At first, there's some doubt about what kind of leader Castro is. Everyone knows that his brother is communist, but people don't know what Fidel Castro is. Okay, and in 1961, Castro's going to declare himself. He's a Marxist-Leninist. He's a communist. Okay, Marxist, a follower of Marx. Again, this idea of the struggle between the proletarians and the bourgeoisie. And once the proletarians become educated, they'll overthrow the bourgeoisie and create communism number one, this utopian society. But before that utopian society can be created, communism has to be stable. And a communist party can promote that stability and can educate the people enough so they can reach communist number one, this utopian society. Okay, because in countries like Cuba, Cuba is not the Germany of Marx or the England of Marx and Engels. Okay, Cuba is a very agrarian society with an economy that's over dependent on sugar production. Okay, they have some light industries, but not a lot. Okay, and once Castro declares that he's a Marxist-Leninist, he's going to gain Soviet support. They're going to buy his sugar because the U.S. had been a major importer of Cuban sugar. So now Castro is allying himself with the Soviet Union, and because he's so close to the United States, he can serve as a valuable ally to the Soviet Union, and it could be a very pragmatic decision if you look at it in one way. Because he's so close to the U.S., that means he becomes very valuable to the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union will aid him and his countrymen. Okay. Now, in the 50s and 60s, we have missiles that carry nuclear weapons, but they don't go that far. Turkey is a NATO ally, and Turkey is like a dagger pointing at the heart of the Soviet Union because the U.S. has missiles in Turkey, and the missiles at that time could reach the industrial heartland of the Soviet Union: Perm, Baku, Donetsk, Moscow, Leningrad, Kiev. Okay, so U.S. missiles 50s and 60s can reach that. Okay, and they're a direct threat to the Soviet Union. So once Khrushchev and Castro make this alliance, the Soviet Union will begin sending missiles to counter the U.S. threat to its heartland. Okay, and from Cuba, okay, look at where they can reach here or even later. This is in 1962. So this was an earlier map. So this is the 50s. So 1490 miles. This is a little farther. Okay, the reach of medium-range ballistic missiles all the way up to just south of Washington, D.C. And then all the way up 2,000 miles. Look at 2,000 miles. The other one was 1,900. Oh, 1490, my mistake. Okay, look at how far they can reach. They can reach all the way up into Boston, New York, Dallas, Denver, Chicago. Now, what's going to happen is that at this point in time, we don't have satellites, but we do have U.S. spy planes that fly really high and take pictures. And a CIA plane, a U-2 high-flying plane takes a picture, and once those pictures are developed, an analyst in the U.S. discovered that the Soviet Union is setting up that there are missiles in Cuba. The only one who has the capability of doing that is the Soviet Union. So that's a major threat, and it becomes a major crisis. Okay, so President Kennedy, all right, he's given two options. The Air Force, an Air Force general, LeMay, I believe, Curtis LeMay, he favors bombing Cuba to get rid of these missiles. Okay, what will that do? Okay, the U.S. will bomb a Soviet proxy. Okay, actually, even more than a proxy, a Soviet ally. Will that lead to World War II? Will that lead to World War III? The other option is the Navy option. Okay, Navy admirals propose that the president can order a blockade, have Navy ships surround Cuba, and prevent any more missiles from arriving in Cuba. Okay, so that's the action that's selected. All right. After a series from October 23 to 28, the U.S. Navy will blockade Cuba. And the way the blockade works is if those Soviet ships carrying the missiles continue to advance, the Navy will fire warning shots, a warning shot first. Okay, close to the ship but not hitting the ship. As a warning, turn around or else. Okay, if those ships continue, then it gets dicey because the next step is to fire directly and sink them. Okay? So luckily that doesn't happen. But the world came very close to nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay? Now, what happens is there's going to be a diplomatic solution. Remember the missiles in Turkey? The diplomatic solution is the U.S. will take down its missiles in Turkey, and the Soviet Union will take down its missiles in Cuba. Okay? That's the diplomatic solution. Of course, in the U.S., it's promoted as a victory, and the taking down of the missiles in Turkey is played down. Okay? Same thing, I imagine the same thing happened in the Soviet Union. So, okay? So Khrushchev is going to agree to remove the missiles, and then Kennedy will promise to remove the missiles from Turkey, and that does happen. All right? And part of the reason is that the U.S. was already conducting trials to put nuclear missiles on submarines. So it does play a role as well. All right? That does play a role. Now let's talk a little bit about Japan, Korea, and the Cold War. Again, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, the two times that nuclear weapons have been used. All right. If you want to know a little bit about it, this is a good article. Okay. This is the number of immediate deaths: 135,000, 64,000. Other people will later die because of radiation poisoning. All right. These are some pictures. This is the bomber that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. This is the air crew. This is some of the results of that. Okay. Again, a survivor. All right. So, why did Truman? And remember, Truman had not known about the Manhattan Project until very late, until he became president due to the death of FDR. Okay. So keep that in mind. And the two main reasons for the dropping of the atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki were pressure Japan to surrender. That's definitely number one. But another reason is as a message to the Soviet Union, which was already emerging as a potential enemy of the U.S. And the U.S. wanted to force Japan to surrender before the Soviet Union could enter the war. Okay, if there was an invasion of Japan, it would have probably involved Soviet troops as well. But remember, Germany was divided. Would Japan have been divided between the Soviet Union and the United States? Probably. Okay. Now, what's going to end up happening is, in Japan, the emperor is like a combination, like the president and the pope. He's the chief religious leader of the Japanese. Okay, he has a lot of power, and so after these bombs are dropped, the U.S. agrees that he can remain as emperor. He's not going to have any political power, but he's going to remain as emperor of Japan. He will not be deposed, and Japan is going to surrender. Okay, after that. And there's going to be an occupation from 1945 to 52. All right. It's going to be led by forces under Douglas MacArthur. Now, during that time, there's going to be a conflict in the nearby East Asian country of Korea. Korea had been divided along the 38th parallel into the communist north, which is part of the Second World, close ally of the Soviet Union, and the south. It doesn't have a democratic government, but it is an ally of the U.S. Okay, and what I want you to think, is the U.S. It's going to support a lot of dictatorial governments. Okay, a famous Secretary of State once said, and he was referring to dictators. He said, "They might be bastards, but there are bastards." Meaning, in this competition, during the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States. Both are going to overlook their ideologies in return for supporters. Okay? So what's going to happen? You have this division, but the North Koreans are going to invade South Korea. Okay? And there's going to be a special UN mission. There's going to be a special UN meeting, and the U.S. is able to get a force to support South Korea, a UN force, a UN peacekeeping force, but the majority of this peacekeeping force will be composed of U.S. forces. Okay, because they see it again. They want to contain communism. They want to prevent communism from taking over, and this period of time after World War II, it's a period of great instability. Okay, and many people become attracted to communism because they've lost everything. All right, so it's a very precarious time, and the U.S. is gonna send troops. It's gonna use Japan as a staging area, and then send troops, U.S. troops, to conquer. And they're gonna make a mistake. MacArthur's gonna make a mistake. He's gonna send troops, like at a certain point in time, the UN peacekeeping force is very successful, and they're defeating the North Koreans, and they're pushing them. And Chinese diplomats, they try to warn the U.S. not to approach the Chinese border. Okay? They try to warn the U.S. through a third party. Don't approach the Chinese border. We think this is a threat, and we'll be forced to respond. But Douglas MacArthur doesn't listen, and he keeps pushing his troops to advance, all the way up to the Yalu River. Okay? The border with China. And what's going to happen is that you're going to have a large number of Chinese divisions crossing over and attacking UN peacekeeping forces. And they'll push these UN peacekeeping forces all the way south until there's a stalemate. And the war is going to end with a peace treaty. Again, close to the 38th parallel, dividing communist North Korea from a South Korea that's dictatorial, but that in time will become democratic. All right. Now, I brought this up. Because I want to look at reasons why both Japan will recover from the devastation of World War II, and Korea will become what's known as a tiger. Okay, Korea will become a major. South Korea will become a major. A highly developed country, and it's a member of it's one of the most developed countries today. All right. Now, think of these events again: the very long Cold War, the Korean War, and later the Vietnam War. Okay. The U.S. will send thousands of troops. They have to stage them somewhere. And South Korea and Japan will become major staging areas. Here's Vietnam. Okay, here's Korea. All right, and so the U.S. will spend in infrastructure for their bases in Japan, in Korea, and they have a permanent force in the demilitarized zone, this border between North and South Korea. Now, not only do they invest in infrastructure, housing for their the service members, but they're also going to be paying the service members who are stationed there. These service members are going to spend that money. Marines, soldiers, airmen, Navy. They're going to be spending money. So is this a type of subsidy to Japan? Is this a type of subsidy to South Korea? That Koreans can reinvest in the development of their country. South Korea, industrialization. Japan, rebuilding and industrialization. What do you think? I think it is, but there are also going to be negative effects. Okay? One of the main negative effects will be sex trafficking. these Americans that are stationed in Japan and South Korea, an overwhelming majority will be young men between the ages of 17 and 30 years old. Okay? Some of them have their families, some of them don't have their families. Some of them are not married. Okay? So, again, young men between 17 and 30 years old. Okay? So there's going to definitely be the development of prostitution and a certain amount of sex trafficking. Okay? So that's definitely a negative. You're also going to have civilian resentment by Japanese and by Koreans. Okay? One of the reasons for this is that if an American, again, mostly young men, and again, I'm talking 50s, 60s. Okay, so I'm not that close to the present yet. 50s, 60s, 70s. Okay, so mostly young men. If one of those young Americans commits a crime, most times they'll be tried in military courts. Okay. They'll be tried under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, not under the Code of Korea, not under the Judicial Code of Japan. That's going to cause resentment. Because, I mean, some Americans will commit crimes. And these crimes will definitely be publicized by mass media in Japan and in Korea. All right? There's also going to be, again, this pressure on civilian women, Korean and Japanese women, okay, from service members. Okay, so again, there are positives, there are negatives to this. Okay, positives, infrastructure. In a sense, the U.S. is investing in both Japan and Korea. And again, even though the overwhelming majority of American service members will behave, you're still going to have a certain amount that don't. You're still going to have a certain amount that will, again, they're young men. So take that as you will. All right? These are some other hotspots that occurred during the Cold War, 1948 to 1975. You guys can take a look at those. Okay, pause the video, take a look at that, or look at it under my notes. Now let's talk a little bit about European recovery. We talked about the recovery of Japan, the recovery of Korea after the Korean War, the reasons for that. So we talked about the road to World War II. Then we have the Potsdam Conference, negotiate the peace, okay? And you also have, as a response, the Allies don't want a return to a World War III. So they figure that they have a solution, okay? They're going to promote free trade, all right? So they see the world a certain way, modernization theory. And Bretton Woods is an agreement that promotes free trade. Okay, this idea of free trade, because the signers believe that free trade can prevent World War III. Okay, and then of course the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan also, they also are part of the strategy of to fight communism and to prevent World War III. But your book does a really good job of talking about both of these. So what I do want to spend time is on Bretton Woods, okay, because I don't think your book does as good of a job, and I think it's a very important conference. All right, so the Potsdam Conference is between Truman, Stalin, and Churchill, and they're trying to figure out how to, again, how to negotiate the peace, and they're going to partition Germany, okay, and the Soviet Union will get a part of Eastern Poland, and Poland will get a large part of Eastern Germany. And they're going to negotiate this four-part partition of Germany. Okay, here's the four parts. This is the British part, the French part, the American part, the Soviet part. Now the capital, what was the capital, Berlin, is in the Soviet part. Keep that in mind. That's why we had to have a Berlin airlift, because it's not within one of the first world parts. Okay, so, and again, Berlin is also partitioned, Soviet part, and again, British, French, American parts. So these parts will be united. The British, the French, and the Americans will unite this part, West Germany. And the Soviet part will be East Germany. Okay, same thing, East Berlin, this will become West Berlin. All right, so again, the punishment of Germany. Another step is this Bretton Woods Agreement. This is a good article on it. So these policies are, again, they're going to be part of this idea of modernization theory. Okay, modernization theory is connected to neoliberalism. So it's free trade and a free market. People who support modernization theory, like the U.S., like Great Britain, like France, they want to promote free trade and a free market. They see that as a strong way to prevent a World War III. Okay, and this neoliberalism, again, it's the evolution of classical liberalism, promotion of individual rights. All right, so people who support modernization theory, they think that the global South or the third world is underdeveloped because they lack personal freedoms, they have excessive government regulations, they have a weak civil society, and they have anti-modern cultural traditions that are communal instead of individualistic. That's why they think, okay? And their solution is going to promote this theory in this Bretton Woods Agreement, okay? So they're going to tie the currencies. Since the U.S. has they own 3/4 of the gold supply in 1944, they're going to tie these different currencies to the U.S. dollar, okay? So the British pound, German mark, French franc. And when Soviet representatives who are also meeting, when they see the direction of this meeting, they're going to withdraw, because they're definitely against free trade. They're definitely against what's being promoted here. All right. They're also going to set up, the signers of the Bretton Woods Agreement are going to set up the International Monetary Fund. They're also going to set up the World Bank. These are two organizations that are going to work with banks to loan money to third world countries. Again, I'm using the term third world the way it was used back then. Today, we would call these countries the global South. All right? So they're going to get these loans. And when these global South countries cannot repay the loans, then these organizations will help them out so long as they promote these neoliberal policies. Neoliberal policies are, they have to cut down on social services. They have to shrink the government. Okay, so see how they're promoted, these neoliberal values, modernization theory, neoliberal. And I'm going to use, so neoliberalism is, in a sense, the evolution of classical liberalism. All right? Because the way that liberalism is used in the US today is different. So think neoliberalism. All right? So these two institutions will get money from banks to loan out to third world countries. And when those third world countries, with those countries in the global South cannot repay, then they're gonna alleviate the payments, give them breaks, so long as they cut down social programs and they shrink government spending. Okay, so in a sense, get rid of, well, in a sense, curtail or destroy welfare states, developing welfare states in the global south. Okay, some examples: Brazil, Greece, Democratic Republic of Congo. And the meeting does occur in 1944, before the end of the war. And the answer to why 1944, why they met in 1944, is that by 1944, the Allies are definitely can see the finish line. They can see that they are going to win, so long as they keep attacking, they keep doing what they're doing, and so they want to try to again set up the post World War II world. Okay, so Bretton Woods system, very important. All right. Now, in the devastated world, in the devastated Europe after World War II, communism looks again very, very promising. Okay, people have lost everything. So the U.S. solution is the Marshall Plan. Okay, to all these loans, to pump money into these European economies so they can recover. All right. Now these were industrial powers, so this modernization theory does help them out. It doesn't help out as much. It doesn't help countries out as much that don't have an industrial base already, but it can help out. It does tie in nicely with Western European powers, Western European countries that were devastated. All right, so again, this communist appeal. Now the Truman Doctrine, named after President Truman, is they want to. The policy is to block the spread of communism, okay, into Turkey and Greece. So there's definitely like economic aid because Greece and Turkey are devastated, and they want to prevent the rise of a communist party. You can see the devastation. You can see the attraction of communism. There's the hammer and sickle flag, this locomotive, and there is Greece, represented as a person lying across the tracks. All right, and in this cartoon, look at the money. So you have two trains that are going to crash. What does the dollar sign represent? The dollar sign represent. Who does it represent? And Greece is in the middle. Okay. So again, the U.S. wants to promote, wants to contain communism. 1947, you also have the development of the Marshall Plan for Western Europe. Okay, so this massive aid, direct aid, loans, and financial credit. Okay, European countries have poor credit. Countries can have credit too, like us, like individuals. And so this aid takes the form of direct aid, loans, and financial credit. So by the 1950s, this was to the tune of more than $12 billion, which was a very big quantity back then. Okay, and Stalin and the Soviet Union cannot counter in 47, so they're going to clamp down on Eastern Europe. Make sure that Eastern Europe supports them, or else. Now, the only communist region that resists is Yugoslavia. They're industrialized and they're communists, but they're independent under Tito. And Tito is going to maintain Yugoslavia as a United Nations state, despite the fact that they have different ethnicities. You have Muslims. You have Muslim people. You have Slavic Eastern Orthodox people. You have Catholics. Okay? And Marshal Tito, as he was known, he'll be able to maintain this as a relatively powerful country that can resist the Soviet Union. Okay? So Yugoslavia maintains a careful juggling act in not angering the Soviet Union enough so that the Soviet Union will send troops, and they are powerful enough that if the Soviet Union had sent troops, they would not have been an easy conquest. Okay? Then when Marshal Tito dies, that's when Yugoslavia will break up into these different republics that we have today. Okay? Now, here we have, again, the unions. West Germany, East Germany. All right. So the Soviet Union tries to, in a sense, take over West Berlin through a blockade. They don't allow food. They don't allow food to arrive from West Germany. They close off the roads that connected the West Berlin, the NATO control part. Well, NATO's not. The part controlled by the part overseen by the U.S., Britain, and France. They blockade it, and the U.S. will send planes. Okay, from 1948 to 1949 to resupply, to supply West Berlin with food so it doesn't starve. All right. And again, the united part will become West Germany. The communist held part will become East Germany. And again, the U.S. military bases on West German soil, they serve a purpose, right? They maintain a U.S. presence opposite the Soviet presence in East Germany. Are these U.S. military bases subsidies? Are there negatives to keeping these military bases? Okay, so remember what I mentioned for Japan and for Korea. Okay, and this is my last slide. Thank you very much, you guys. I'll post this shortly.